So good morning and thank you for attending. I know it's 10 o'clock or just a few minutes gone past. So I'm hoping that you can hear me. So if you could just let me know in the chat, making sure that everyone has got sound. Matt, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Well, that's good news. that would be a bit awkward. Let's just make sure that people can hear us and then we'll start doing the introductions. Well, no one's saying anything, so I guess we'll. Oh, yeah, Josh has. Thank you very much. Thanks, Josh. So, I guess thank you again for joining us this morning. We are joined absolutely by royalty, I guess, this morning, Mr. Mat Pullen. Your emoji head is still huge. I'll have to say. So
that's why I'm getting further back from the screen so that my head doesn't look
exactly. That's why I kind of cover it. So we're going to be kind of talking about probably a hot topic that I know we kind of have spoken about quite a lot over the last few weeks. You and I have done several webinars about various things. And in fact, I think we're doing another one later on at 4 o'clock, which is great, with a much bigger panel. But we're going to be talking about kind of remote teaching and learning. I think this is more a kind of and I say consultancy. I think what we absolutely would love is if people have questions from the webinar audience, please feel free to use those chat features as we go along and we'll answer. We've also got Ryan in our vendor marketing team who is going to be able to assist us. So I guess in the first instance, Matt, probably just a brief introduction to yourself.
Yeah, fine. Hi, everyone. Again, yeah, thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Matt. I am a senior lecturer at the University of South Wales, where I teach future teachers on our undergraduate programme. I was a secondary school PE teacher for 12 years, I think it was, and got into using technology as being a PE teacher. Alongside the education piece, I'm also an Apple professional learning specialist, Google certified educator, and Microsoft innovative educator. I think that's all the titles.
Badge collector,
yeah. But you know, jokes aside, I think it's around knowing what tools are out there and knowing what's best to use. And although I'll have my preferences, I think it's always useful to sort of come at it. I mean, Tag and I have had this conversation. It's not necessarily the thing that you have in your hand. It's how you use it. So having that range of understanding of the tools available, I feel puts me in a better position to be able to support people. So
yeah, absolutely. And I guess just around to me. So you'll see the name Tag. I have a very long surname, so Tom Abel Green. I'm the UK Education Solutions Manager for the academia group. So my role is very much around strategic leadership support and I guess our proposition to market. And I work, although alongside our sales team, my role is very much around making sure that we're I guess morally and ethically supporting our customers in the right way. Unlike Matt, I have not very many badges. I was creative at school. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I have been in the industry for about 15-16 years and have been part of some pretty big deployments, which is kind of where my experience also comes from. I guess talking around the use of technology, the reality is, Matt, as you mentioned, that you're certified across those three platforms, and the reality is I think we probably end up talking quite a lot around iPad specifically, just because we do a lot of work around iPad. But what I would say is, please don't, if you're listening, think that's all we care about. That's absolutely not the case. We are trying to just get some of the points and considerations across. And actually, probably regardless of the device, the reality is the pillars that are required across the board are the same, right? And that's the thing. That's what we certainly have learned about. So I guess topics of the agenda, really, we'll go through these various slides. It's very much a kind of a chat conversation. And I guess we'll look at what home teaching looks like. As you know, we talked about home learning, but actually, what does home teaching look like? You know, what can you use in terms of distance professional learning in these really tough times? What avenues can you explore in terms of looking at content and support for remote teaching? What does that long-term approach look like? And I think one of the big questions I often get asked is, what do we do when we go back to school, college, university, and we're calling it the new normal. I don't think anyone really knows what that might be like right now. But we have spoken in the past, Matt, about the project-based learning. I think that's, you know, a really key part of being able to support everybody. And then we've probably got a close to the bone comment, right? Is what's happening in reality if we push pause, and we'll kind of come on to that. So in the first instance, what does home teaching, and I guess in brackets learning, really look like? We've had both experiences, really, Matt, haven't we, as parents, and you specifically as an educator. What's the biggest takeaway so far for you?
I think for me, there's a positive aspect. I trying to be as positive as I can with everything, and that is it's opening up people's eyes to the potential of the non-traditional route to do things. And I understand the pressures. I understand that some people were possibly more prepared for this because that's where they were on their trajectory in terms of their own learning, or that's where the school was on its journey anyway. But for me, I think it's made people realise that although the arc of learning is really, really rapid at the moment, I think people are starting to see now that the technology will actually cut their workload eventually, and it's changed the kind of relationship that you have with your learners in terms of how they share their work, how you create things for them. Is it all about the teacher having to be the sage on the stage, as the saying goes, or now are they able to actually take that guide on the side? Because I think now they can't be the sage on the stage because there isn't a stage for them at the moment. And I think people are starting to see that it works, right? It might not work for everyone, but the old way didn't work for everyone. So I think it's really giving people that opportunity to see the breadth of ways that you can deliver things. And again, I'm sure people were aware of this before, but now it's kind of been thrust upon them.
It's interesting, actually. And we did a webinar yesterday, and I was talking to James, our group technical director, and I was talking specifically about mindset. And we know that moving to a cloud solution, you know, doesn't matter about the device, but when you move to a cloud computing solution, there is a different way of working. And often one of the barriers that we see is the fear of change, right? That's I've always done something in a certain way, and then so how do I continue doing this in a cloud solution? And I think from our perspective, the mindset piece is really important. We talk about change management, and you know, people kind of go, ooh la la, kind of about the wording, but actually, I think for me, what I've seen, and I'm really used to home working, but seeing my two children who are 11 and 17 doing their kind of schooling and college work from home has been really interesting. A couple of things, right? Is the engagement and I guess the expectation from me as a parent, but also knowing what's really available from a teaching perspective, having worked with lots of schools and colleges and so on. And the expectation from parents on teachers, you know, expectation of teachers on students, and I don't think there's a pure definition that says this is how you must do things. And I know that probably some of the stuff that we've let my son, who's 11, do and not so much be so bothered about is because we're doing other things that he is learning skills with, right? So we're talking about gardening, cooking, all those sorts of things, and stuff that he probably wouldn't traditionally be that interested in. There's been a massive rise in that. But going back to the mindset thing is, I think what we found very early on, especially for schools, I say schools specifically because I think that's where there was probably a bigger surge in requests, is how do I teach using the blackboard behind me on a video camera, right? Can anyone hear me? Can you hear me now? Can anyone hear me? I think we have some technical issues. Yeah, oh, Ryan, you can hear me. So it's just you, Matt, by the sounds of things. So I'm going to carry on without my headphones, so apologies. We're trying to get Matt back in the room. So I'll carry on talking, and hopefully Matt will be able to give me a thumbs up. Maybe not. No. Yeah. Carry on, Matt. Okay. Matt's going to leave and come back. So there we go, technical issues. But I'll carry on talking a little bit about what I was covering. And I think the reality is the home teaching part is really about making sure that the mindset. Can you hear me now, Matt?
I can. Yes.
Great. Awesome.
Apologies, everybody.
Okay, no worries. I can sell you a new computer if you like.
Brilliant.
So I've taken my headphones out, so hopefully it sounds all right. But just what I was saying, Matt, is the mindset piece is really important, because we don't want teachers to just replicate teaching from a wall, or just having a video camera on all the time, because we know that there is an engagement, or I guess a level of engagement from students that you can't be on there the same time you would be in a lesson.
Yeah.
You know, your son Max is hugely fortunate, and I've seen some of the great stuff that he's been able to do that probably isn't school related. So the Apple Teacher Award that he did, and you know, all of the great stuff that he's created, and there's skills that I think probably have been developed more quickly than we would have anticipated because of the way that we're living. But I also know that you're working with local schools in Wales, and I think there is also there about I guess maybe talk about the experience, the conversations you've had with those sorts of school teachers.
I think, you know, the first kind of few weeks it was not panic stations, because, you know, I think teachers are a lot more advanced, and I don't think anyone went into panic. I think it was just all hands to the deck. What are we going to do? And teachers are great problem solvers, right? So the conversations I've had with some of the local schools in Wales is just wanting to support them really with what can we do. Lots of them internally had a plan going forward, and they're rolling that out. And I follow a lot of them on Twitter, and they're doing some fantastic things. And similarly, you know, they're sharing the work that students are doing online, and it's fantastic. But then there's the ongoing thing of, is everybody comfortable doing that? Are all the teachers comfortable doing that? And are there teachers now that are seeing things online that they're now wondering, how do I do that myself? So that's kind of where the conversation's turning now to those schools, is what can we do to support you to be able to develop your skill set so that you can join in and set those similar tasks. And exactly as you said, those tasks aren't going to be in the form of a classroom set task, because they can't be, because in a classroom, if a student gets stuck, they put their hand up. Well, if you're setting this as an independent task, what happens when the student has to put their hand up? So actually, does that mean you have to change your approach to creating resources? So that there's almost like a hand up button on what you create, where they can say, I'm stuck, I'll tap the voice recorded element, and I'll hear my teacher say it again, or I'll watch the video again, or whatever it might be. So that's kind of where those discussions are going now. Like, what can we do to support those teachers to understand what online learning needs as opposed to classroom teaching?
Yeah, and I guess we'll talk about that, I guess, in the project-based stuff a bit later on. But one of the hot topics that we absolutely know is being discussed at the moment is the announcements that came out from the DfE a couple of weeks ago around the ability for schools to, I guess, apply for funding. You know, academia as a business are supporting actually the DfE piece on all platforms. So Apple, the Microsoft piece, and the Google piece. And I guess there was a big focus about moving to the cloud from that. But there's also some talk around the funding that's going to be available for disadvantaged students, and I know that that's a wide bracket, right? There's different, I guess, connotations of what people might consider as a disadvantaged student. But how do we make use of the technology that we have available to us at home in terms of supporting that home teaching?
I think historically, and I'm going to paint a broad brush over this, right? So I don't want to offend anyone with this. I think historically, people at home have assumed that if you want to use technology to help my child, you should supply it. Okay, you're the school, you should supply it. It said my child goes to school for an education. Why would I supply that, right? Yeah. And I think now what parents are starting to see is the need for that tool, and almost hopefully appreciate that these things are not just school-based tools. So therefore, if they are coming home, then it's probably spends as much time in the house as it does in the school. So actually that whole kind of joint purchase, joint approach is usually a better approach, because if that device was bought by the school, then technically the school should say, well, you can't use it for anything at home then. And I think that's blurring now, right? So I think people are starting to appreciate that their child needs access to that technology, especially now. But I would hope that they're also seeing that that tool is actually bringing out different skill sets in a child. So now I'm on board. And it could have just been, I don't know what you're using it for in school, so therefore it's hard for me to get behind why you're using it, because I know the one they have at home, they play Minecraft or Fortnite or whatever. So is that what they're doing in school? And I'm not quite sure. So it's hard to have that relationship. I think now it's been thrust into the mainstream. People can see what learning can take place on a device, as opposed to it just being, it's an ICT lesson and we're doing, a presentation, we're learning how to make a presentation, we're learning how to code. We're actually using it now to learn, and that's a very different kind of aspect.
And I think we talk about the digital pencil case, don't we? Is that devices aren't always now for just an ICT or an IT lesson. They're really about how do we use the technology to I guess to be part of that lesson, right? Because there are tools that you can use that are fantastically strong, and actually what you do is tap into the individuals, the students individually. I remember, when I was at school, and I joked about being creative, but I remember waiting to use a long time ago a Canon Star Writer. It was a digital typewriter. There was one that was available, but I didn't use it because it necessarily made me learn better. I just enjoyed learning with it more, right? So I would wait to type out rather than writing and all those sorts of things. And maybe it was a distraction. Maybe it was because I wasn't engaged enough in other ways, and that's not because I had bad teachers. I think it's just me as a child, really. But what I've seen with the conversations I've had with schools is absolutely, it's like there are schools putting staff on furlough, colleges putting staff on furlough. There are people in the world that are not in the potential of being able to earn as much money as they were because of there's no that's been changed. And I think that the funding is a great scheme from the DfE. I also think that there are great ways that schools have the ability to use the funding mechanisms in terms of leasing and that sort of stuff. And I think repurposing some of that technology is really clever. And I think also is just making sure that parents are going back to the mindset is that maybe that they consider the use of a personal device at home being able to be used during the day as a teaching tool is also a really positive step. And I think that comes down to messaging, right? Is when people understand that the curriculum at the moment is currently being delivered in that digital format, then it's only gonna add the positive values to it. Of course, we have to look at the other issues around access to internet and multiple children in a household and who has access to what device and so on. So I totally get that, but I think you and I have talked about this certainly. I guess on and off various calls and so on, is we've never had that bigger opportunity to make a change, right? Now is that time where we can really start to make a difference. And I know we'll come back to that later, but one of the things that I've been speaking about a lot, is certainly how do we can get teachers certainly up and running with devices, but actually the key to that is how do we support their training? I had several schools that wanted to go live within a few weeks during April, and the issue for us was never as a business to get devices. I mean, it did get quite hard, but it was actually how do we make sure that the teachers go back at the start of effectively the term and be able to deliver those online lessons. And I think that's a key bit, and that's where we've lent on you and some of the other Apple specialists, but also the Microsoft and Google trainers as well. But how have you been able to support, I guess, the people that you support through a distance learning program?
I mean, at first it was like throw anything, right? It was throw everything up and see what sticks. And I think what we found, or what I personally found, was that was pretty daunting to a lot of educators, because Like, what do you choose? Like, there's so much stuff out there. So what do you choose? And I think what's happened since probably Easter going forward is a more strategic approach, a conversation.
Yeah.
What is it that people need? How can we make that bespoke? And I think that's a key element of actually saying, well, what is it that you need? It's understanding the client as such, or the educators or the school, and then utilising a range of tools to support them.
Can I raise my hand?
Please do.
Do you think that is because of the expectations are changing? Do you think that's why the initial bout of we need to get something to now actually we're a bit more considered, is people's expectations have changed across the board? I
think people have started to see. I think at first it was we need to do something, and no one knew what the something was. I think as time's gone on, people have had a bit of a chance to breathe and look at what works for their learners, and not just copy what the school down the road is doing, and not just jumping on things. And I think what I've started to see from my interactions with schools, or just seeing what people are doing on Twitter, is that there's a strategy forming. And again, I'm not in any position to criticize how anyone's doing anything. But I think when a decision was made within like 3 days of all schools are going to shut, no school's got the time to really plan anything strategically in that time. But I think what you can see is a lot of schools that have taken the time to say, okay, what is our approach? Who are our learners? What tools do they have? What can we do that's realistic? And then that's when they then look for what support they can have. I think from my point of view, it's been a mix of a lot of the things that are on the screen. I've done live webinars, but I also record them, because I know that not everyone's going to be available between 10 and 11 to access something that I've done. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't not have access to it at that time. The video tutorials, I've been crazily making like a whole YouTube channel of like 2-minute clips of this is what you could do, this is what you could do. Because again, not everyone's going to want to sit and listen to an hour webinar. They might not have time, but a 2-minute clip might give them enough inspiration to say, oh, I could try that. Yeah. And then, as we kind of go down that list, it's just what works for the schools. I did have a call with a school last week, just talking about what their strategy was going forward in terms of using their devices in the classroom, but how we could kind of change that a little bit to become an online kind of planning session as a team, where they can look at how they could adapt to some of those strategies for online learning instead. But then that had to be an after school, like when the school start and finish anymore, an after school session, because a lot of their staff were operating as a hub in the school, so therefore they weren't able to join the training, and that was kind of unfair to them to miss out on it live. So we're looking at, is that a session that we do in the evening, if that fits in with the staff, or like a 3 till 4 o'clock when the hub finishes. So I think that was an interesting discussion to have a look at, what works for the people. And I think when we talked about like what is home teaching, I think I'm starting to think about like what is home training as well. Like, what does that mean for me? Do I need to be in the school all the time? There are obvious benefits to being in the school and being able to work with people, but there's also some real benefits to being able to do things online and having things recorded that people can look at again at a later date to refresh their memory is a useful approach.
So, and actually, just on that, not just on the CPD piece, but I think generally, I think that there's a lot of great support, and there's free resources. I know you talked about your YouTube channel, great plug by the way. But actually, I commented on it the other day. I just said your library is getting bigger and bigger, but also that there is a lot of great resources on social media platforms. And even academia's done a resources page where it's not stuff that we've created, but it's stuff that we've found across the various sites that we're on, and people that we work with, and we've shared that. Your stuff's on there, but lots of other stuff is there, and actually it goes back to a couple of things that we haven't discussed today, but we have discussed in the past. Is the reality of the world is that we no longer live probably in a standard 9-to-5 routine, and actually having access to content at any given time is a really powerful tool. And we worked with a university in London several years ago where we put a huge amount of devices in, and we talk about that being a great deployment. I think it was the biggest in Europe at the time. The success for us, though, was the access that the students had to the digital content. And I think they accessed it over 1 million times in the first year. But it was done outside of 9 to 5. So as an individual, there's lots of things that I want to read and learn about or catch up with and so on. And I'm able to do that much more so than ever now, because I can go online in the evening, the stuff I've saved during the day, and I'll come back to it. But also we're seeing a couple of independent schools that essentially were boarding schools where they'd have a service on a Sunday, because that's what they do, is they're recording a very short kind of headmaster speech and a couple of hymns. And it's just a video camera footage of the grounds, for example, right? And I think it's a really powerful way of getting other messages across. And so teachers are still starting to do head teacher assemblies, for example, and they're sharing that through the platform they have with their students. But also the content, the great stuff that's being done by some of those individuals and teachers that are maybe more skilled than others or have more confidence than others, are able to share that with their colleagues. I know you do that hugely, but I think it's a really powerful tool. And when we talk about the skill set that is needed to support this, again, for me, it's not about somebody who is great at using technology. Some of the better skill sets that are required are having the ability to have that change in mindset, the ability to not be worried or scared of something going wrong. I mean, what people didn't see before this webinar started is that literally minutes before, we still had some technical issues, and it's stuff that we've tested over 100 times probably, and it's worked fine. Your headphones stop working during this. And I think it's just, these things happen, and going back to the expectation piece and all that sort of stuff is, if you can put all of those things together, the team as a cohort will grow, I think, stronger, and the knowledge base will grow stronger. And right now it seems like a real something to get worried about or frustrated about. But actually, when you look at this in 3 or 4 weeks' time and go, oh yeah, that was back then, we've got over that kind of thing.
Yeah, I saw someone on Twitter say recently that that you're probably in the greatest time now to try things out, because there's no high stakes accountability at the moment, because everyone's trying what they're trying, okay, and no one's judging anybody, or I would hope no one's judging anybody for trying things that would work. So I think now is the time really where teachers might have that little bit of opportunity to try something different, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but you tried. Because like we said, if and good timing to come onto this, what's it going to look like when we go back? There's the discussion around the new normal, but all we know is it isn't going to be like it was before. And I suppose as people in technology, we've always kind of alluded to that when we've done presentations. I've heard you talk about this, what's the world going to look like in 10 years time? Well, we don't know, but we know it isn't going to look like it does now. I think we've just accelerated that 10 years to like 3 months.
How do we prepare for what we don't know? I mean, the reality is if we always do what we've always done, then we'll always get what we've always got, right? And the new normal, I think every time I speak to a head teacher or a principal, or even colleagues in the industry, and it's like, what do you think? What is it going to look like? What have you heard? I spoke to probably 5 or 6 different head teachers yesterday, and the same question to each one, but they all gave me a very different response. And it's an interpretation of what they think might happen versus what the messaging is that's coming out. We talk about the SAME model, and just kind of completely jumping over to that. But, we talk about that model for students, but actually there's that model for staff as well. And one teacher's substitution is another teacher's redefinition. And actually going back to that thing around the opportunity and how do we, if there was ever a time to make a change, now would be a really good time to be able to do that, because we don't have a choice but to think differently. I know that there are rumours that in primary schools, maybe year 6 will be going back as early as the 1st of June, but with a very lenient kind of maybe timescale around that. I'm really conscious of students who have maybe vulnerable people in their family living at home still, that if they go to school, what impact does that have at home? And so there will probably be a mixed reality of people who, maybe it's a rota system where students go into class 1 day a week and the rest of the class are doing it remotely. But then there's lots of other questions. Is that, how does a teacher teach both sets of students in the same class? And will students be taught by a curriculum specialist in that subject, for example? And then you look at the college sector. I guess really for me, probably impactful because of my daughter, but she's doing a 2-year college course, of which she will have missed probably 6 months by the time anything goes back to the new normal. And so what then happens? How much of that content is valuable that she's missed? And I'd argue a lot of it. I remember my 2 years of doing A levels. It flew. It absolutely flew. And my 11-year-old, he's going into year 7, and he never got that end of year 6 experience, and he's being thrust into secondary school, but he'll be going into a secondary school format that is not what we're expecting. We don't even know what it will be like. And I think I worked out yesterday that if you have to social distance in a standard classroom size of 30 students in the space they've got, you're probably no more than 8 or 9 students at a time in that room.
Which is kind of like what international public schools, private schools, sorry.
Yeah, but
that's the norm there.
What do you do with the other 22 students?
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? I think that there's an opportunity here to not just do this as a response to the coronavirus. I think there's an opportunity here to think about, well, what would we have wanted it to look like? Because if no one knows what the future is going to look like, as long as we stick to these parameters of guarding people's safety, what are the other opportunities that we can do? For decades, teachers have talked about smaller class sizes, and now they're going to get it. They're going to get it as a result of something terrible.
Yeah,
they're going to get it. And what impact could that have? And I know there are other implications. I'm not, stupid in thinking that all of a sudden you can just take a class of 30 and put it down into a class of 9 and still facilitate teaching for all of those students, because you need a lot more teachers, and who's going to pay for that, and XXX, right? But I think you look things differently.
Sorry, Matt. You look also at the larger scaled, institutions such as universities, and I think actually we've got a question that's how do you address the conduct of labs in the current scenario? So I'm guessing that's aimed at the higher education piece, but the specialist curriculum subjects such as maybe medicine at university or whatever it might be, and those very specific environments where you have to be ultra careful anyway, but you're going to have to be super ultra careful now, and the impact of the studies for those individuals, because ultimately, especially if you look at the medical industry, right, these are people who right now are the core part of the success of the victory over COVID, as I see that, as we talk about the NHS and so on. But again, that has a bigger impact later on, right? Because people are not coming through. Likewise with teachers, it's an interesting one. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that question specifically.
So yeah, well, I can talk about this obviously from a teaching point of view, because I train teachers, and when we've had these exact discussions, we don't know what university is going to look like in October when we go back. We're planning for the fact that, similar to what you just said then, we can't have 30 students in a lab to do sessions, workshops, etc., because there just isn't the space to do social distancing. So we're talking about having potentially a third of our students in the room, with the other 2/3 joining in via video, and that's a current conversation. But the ongoing piece is you come to university to train to be a teacher, and that's about being in the classroom with the students and practicing your trade. Well, our school's going to be that open to having another person from outside coming in when they've then been in university and then they're coming here. So there's a lot of questions that we need to answer there. We did have a discussion about, could remote teaching form part of their qualification? Could they plan online lessons and teach classes? And is that something is that the new normal, that we're going to train new teachers to understand what online learning looks like and be proficient at understanding setup and strategy, and like you said, not just teaching what's on the board, but actually structuring a lesson in that way? Does that become part of teacher training? So it's hugely shifting our focus to, obviously we'd love it to go back to the scenario we were in before, because children need to be in a class with each other from a social aspect and a well-being aspect. But the reality is that isn't going to happen anytime soon. So what do we do in the meantime?
Well, maybe the new normal is and this is just out the hat, right? This is not just an idea, but maybe half days, right, where there is that interaction, but there's also that remote piece. But then you start talking about working from home, and how do parents, do day-to-day job.
We've talked about that in the second point there, right? So what does that look from age group to age group? But you could argue that around the world there are schools where they don't start till they're 7 anyway. That there are different maternity leave things. Society's going to have to change as a result of this. Yeah,
and the mindset of the culture is different. We look at Finland and we look at some of those other countries as well. But just going back to the question around the labs piece, I know at the university. So have you got any specialist labs that your interaction? Sorry, go back a step. Your interaction within the university, obviously, you've been lent on quite heavily because of your skill sets. But are there specialist labs in your university where you've been part of a conversation where actually, how do we manage this situation, or is that not come to fruition at the moment?
We're not quite there yet, only because we're kind of at the end of assessment and examination. That's happening in the next couple of weeks, so that's been the forefront of those discussions. But I know that we've started to have those off the record discussions about what is this going to look like. In my university, in our campus specifically, we're education and social care and those sorts of things. So from the social care point of view, they have smaller spaces because they have more one-to-one sessions. So I'm assuming that they can still manage that because it tends to be smaller group workshops. But I know that we do have, policing and nursing training. And for instance, I know that what they decided to do about a month ago was say to the final year nursing students, you have a choice. You can either continue on your course as it was, or we're looking to change your course now to say if you want to take the last 3 months of your course as a placement, go and work in the NHS now. We'll ratify that as placement and you'll pass your degree. But what we're also doing is saying you're now helping on the front line as well. Yeah, that's how they changed that approach, was thinking, well, where is the need and how can we change the course to meet that need now?
It's really, I mean, it just, you kind of find us. I mean, I've always said there's always a solution to a problem. It's whether you like it or not, and that's the reality. There probably is a solution. Does it fit? Does it fit where you need it to fit? And just going back on that last point around successes around the world, I mean, you're fortunate to have travelled the world extensively with what you do, and I've in previous roles have travelled the world a lot, so I kind of understand how schooling is, having lived abroad as well. But you are seeing lots of governments already making laws and compulsory device purchases as a one-to-one scheme. I know in Indonesia they took that route. The government is responsible for a one-to-one scheme for all students under a certain age, plus the infrastructure for schools and for outside of school. Do you think there's ever that possibility that might happen? And I'm not picking at our government, by the way, but do you think that is a solid route to help the situations that we find ourselves in?
I think it has to be, to a certain extent, doesn't it? I think and there are schools locally that are still thinking about that as well. The how are we utilising pupil premium money to support, because this isn't ICT. Whereas before, I was thinking about this morning actually. Whereas before, schools looked at IT purchases as an IT purchase, as part of an IT subject. Now I think it's part of a learning and teaching, which means it's a whole school budget issue. So it's not that pot of money that you've got here anymore. It's actually the big pot, and what are we going to use it for? And then when you look at that from government funding, do government fund it as an IT thing, or do they fund it as a school thing? I think there's those opportunities, and I think that's what you're seeing around the world in various places. And I know people are going to be at different points in what they can do with this. But yes, I think it's going to be the way forward, that there needs to be some sort of funding. Does more funding go towards the disadvantaged? Well, you would assume it should do. The parents that can afford it help out because they can now see the value of it, as opposed to it feeling a bit unfair. because why am I having to pay when that child isn't paying or that family isn't paying? I think now people can see, well, we've got the device. You know, my son, yours will be the same, or your children will be the same. We've got a house with technology in it, right? He's got access to a device. Beforehand, it was a device where he would play games. Now it's a device where, at the moment, he's doing a keynote presentation for home learning, and he gets that it's a kind of dual-purpose device. So yeah.
And I think, and then the next step on from that is then what do we, you know, we went and talked about how do we make use of the technology, but in that ideal world where there is a device available for a child, I guess making use of that project-based learning that we've talked about previously is, you know, in this situation, why does it work so well? Well, you know, I've certainly seen my son make use of the Oak National Academy online, right? That was announced by the DFE. Alongside what his school is giving him, but it's, you know, I know that he's now doing his English and maths every day, and he's doing some foundation stuff plus all the other stuff that he's doing and reading and Fortnite, and I think actually that's quite a good learning tool, actually, the Fortnite piece, and that's a whole different subject. But what is good is that it's allowing him to some of that stuff is project based. So, you know, they're doing stuff around the heart, and they're giving pieces of work to look at or links to look at, and then there's a bit of a quiz at the end of the week, and so it all kind of gears up to that I guess that end of that week. But I also know that it gives him the flexibility to kind of do it. So we're not saying every day that he has to do something. We were, when we started, actually, we were quite rigid. 10 till 12, there was a break, and then there was a kind of 2 to half 3, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things isn't a lot. Now we've kind of said, as long as you do all of that piece of work that you're required in the day, we're a bit more flexible about it. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. One is I'm working and trying to be a dad. My wife obviously is working. She has to be on the phone quite a bit and trying to be, or she's a great mum, but we're trying to make it work for everybody. And that's about that learning expectation is we kind of realise that we're not doing a bad job. And what we do in our house, I look at the stuff you do with Max, I'm thinking, why am I not doing this with Charlie? And then I realise that I don't have some of that skill set. But equally, I'd probably think that Charlie's doing some other things that you're not able to do with Max, right? And that doesn't make it wrong or bad. Actually, I think that's great, because when you and I talk, we share those experiences, right? And, you know, and it's great. And, you know, even Max popped into a webinar yesterday with us, or called, you know, just to say hi. And so from that perspective, with the skill sets that I think Charlie's developing is a side of the project-based approach. It's the independent learners type, right? And going back to that piece I talked about with the University of Westminster, where students were learning at a time that suited him, it's kind of that, right? Yeah. It has to be done by 5 o'clock, but it can be done any time during that day.
It's diversity as well, right? So,
yeah.
And this is quite an interesting thing around project-based learning. I think for a long time, from my experience talking to people, it was like a choice of, do you do it this way or do you do it project-based learning way? Is it about teaching content or is it project-based learn for themselves? And I think what we've got an opportunity to do now is think, well, project-based learning is an approach, but in order to do that project-based learning, they need the content. And this is kind of what I've always alluded to, but to move people from here along to think about the alternatives, you almost have to put all of your eggs in one basket and say, no, you should do project-based learning, because then it kind of forces a conversation to come to the middle.
So I'm going to stick a spanner in that works right there, right? And again, this is not about catching anyone out, but if a school is offering project-based learning to their students, what is the danger that some parents are thinking that, well, if the teachers aren't teaching, what are they doing, right? And this is something I heard, and I was just a bit gobsmacked, because I know from working with education customers, there is so much other stuff that has to happen from a teaching perspective. You know, so they might not be teaching year 6 right now, but they're probably marking year 5 work, right? Yeah. Or in the secondary school sector or whatever it might be. And there's so much stuff going on, but that's really not the case, is it? Teachers aren't sitting there with a gin and tonic with their feet up or just doing nothing. And I think, again, for me, I mean, have you seen any of that? Is that a conversation that you've had?
I think the thing is, right, as a student, so the majority of people's experience of school was as a student, right? And what did you see as a student? You saw the teacher in front of you. So then you grow up and assume that's what the teacher does.
Yeah.
because what you didn't do is see what they did when you weren't in the room. You didn't see them doing the marking, the assessment, the planning, the understanding of the individual needs of a classroom, the amount of resource creation it takes, etc. And I think at the moment, that's the bit that's invisible, because it's even more invisible now because those teachers are doing it in their own homes. So yeah, I think, you know, the whole project-based learning approach thing, that takes a huge amount of planning. I was called a lazy teacher for a long time as a PE teacher.
That's only because your planning was, I will kick a ball today, or is that...
That's really rude and disrespectful to PE teachers everywhere, but almost spot on.
Yeah.
But the thing was, my lessons were all about handing over responsibility to the learners. Now, when you look at that at face value, that looks like I'm not doing anything. But to provide students with that much independence takes a lot of planning.
Yeah.
Because you have to give them constraints. You can't just say, there's a ball, get on with it, because who knows what's going to happen. So you have to be able to plan.
I take it back. I didn't mean it.
But you have to be able to plan an approach. You have to build a trust. You have to build a skill set in learners to have the ability to be able to work on their own or work in small groups and not be told what to do all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's quite interesting now, is that hopefully people are starting to realize the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, and the teacher doesn't have to be standing in front and teaching all the time for them to look like they're busy. Actually, people can respect that it takes an awful lot of work beforehand to get to that point.
Yeah. So my question to you then is, and we joked about this, and I think this came from a conversation that I was having at our family meal on Sunday. And we've had to celebrate 2 birthdays in isolation, which in the grand scheme of things, you know, it just is what it is. But probably 2 of those birthdays would have been bigger birthdays next year. And it's kind of, you want to celebrate those, right? So from our perspective, the comment was made, let's just have a 2020B next year and then move to 2022, right? So no one goes up a year, no one gets a year older, everything gets deferred by a year, and what is the worst that could happen, right? And we joked about it, and we were coming up with some crazy ideas. The kids found it hilarious. But then I was talking to you, and I was like, what? We've got a panic button in the top of this webinar. Like, let's hit it and come back in a year's time, and all of this stuff's gone away, but we haven't moved forward, if that makes sense. Apart from all the good stuff that needs to happen. But I guess my question to you is, have you had thought about that a little bit more since we spoke about it, and how close to the line can we really be? I mean, is it reality? Probably not. Some of it, maybe.
I think there's opportunity, and I think those sort of random conversations are what is needed now, because again, we go back to that new normal. Like, the experts are not expert in this because this hasn't happened before. So who are the experts? So who do we listen to? And I think sometimes, and we talk about this in school with children, right? Children can come up with some amazing ideas because they don't have an understanding of you can't do that. They just think anything's possible. And I think actually now, adults are starting to think anything's possible, right? So we could do whatever. So pause in the world now. Like, let's just say all of the children that are going through homeschooling, home learning, and there's no equity, that it just is impossible to. We've already alluded to it between ourselves. We've both got a child in year 6. We're doing different things. Okay, so that's not fair to some extent. But also at the same time, what's the rush for them to move to year 7? What's the rush for a year 12 to move to year 13? Could it just say, let's just extend it? I think my wife, who's celebrating a 40th this year, would love the idea of saying that she can stay 39 for another year.
Well, I was trying to say that about my wife, but I don't even mention ages, if I'm honest. So,
but also at the same time, you know, we technically are doing that. Well, I was meant to be in Las Vegas last week because it's our 10th wedding anniversary and my wife's 40th this year, so we do something special. Now, we have just moved that to the exact same dates next year. Fingers crossed we can go. But our thought is, well, we just treat next year as if it's this year. But we did sort of talk about this as well yesterday. What about the bad moments that have happened that you wouldn't want to just ignore? So people have lost people during this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you don't want to forget that. You probably want to forget the reason it happened, and the bad feeling, but you can't just eradicate that somebody who you loved has died. And so it's just difficult to sort of do a blanket approach to this, right? Which I think is what you were alluding to before. Like, can we do this in certain areas but still understand that it happened? And I think, like when you were saying like 2020A and 2020B, it still happened. We're not saying it didn't happen, but what we're saying is let's provide people more time to enjoy the positive things but not forget the negative things.
And I've got colleagues in the industry that unfortunately, sadly, have lost people to not just the day-to-day reasons, but actually because of COVID-19. And my wishes are with them. My best wishes are with them. And you're right. It's absolutely not about forgetting all of that stuff. And there's no malice in my comments as well, by the way, about what if. And but that's the thing, right? There's an extreme of ultimate joy of what could be achieved versus all of the bad stuff that has happened, and it's affected lots and lots of people, and it's for lots of reasons, right? But I think that what if mentality and that mindset change could bring so much positivity and things that might be feasible, and maybe there should be more flex and more autonomy for institutions individually to make decisions based on a guideline framework, maybe, but actually all of the other things that they can make decisions on that they probably haven't been able to in the past.
Well, on that, I mean, you think at the moment that all the students that are going through A-levels and GCSEs, the school teachers are being told, you make a judgment, okay? It's not going to be an exam. We're going to go on your judgment.
Yeah.
Well, so if this year you're saying that you can trust those teachers to make that judgment based on their understanding of the students who they've taught for the last 2 years, why would we need to go back to a full-on exam system? So there's an opportunity there, right, that you can learn from. Like, you're saying you trust the teachers now. Don't take that trust away from those teachers in a year's time and undermine them by saying, well, we're going to go back to exams because we don't think you can make the right decisions.
So I shared something with you that I read around the kind of massive curriculum changes that might happen in Finland, and I think you said don't kind of read everything, don't believe everything you read. But the premise of that conversation or that article was very much around that the curriculum is going to be moving away potentially in some of those Scandinavian countries around what is traditionally taught around math, science, and English, and actually it's around the skill sets within that. So as an example, if you were at college, and I'm using this specific case because I read it, but if you're going to be doing a university course or a college course around what was it, hotels or self-care or catering or something like that actually it wasn't about the traditional curriculum you'd learn. It's about the skill sets you need to be able to work in that industry, and it was around communication skills. It was around finance, all of those sorts of things. And when I thought about it, I was like, okay, so that I get that, because when I look back on my own education, there is a skill set that actually probably I developed much more fluently being outside in the wide world working. I did a degree in reality and photography, right? I was a sports photographer for many years. But the skill sets I learned weren't necessarily what I learned on my course. That was the theory piece. It was the hands-on experience that I learned, being able to go out and shoot, sports events, knowing what exposures I'd need, all of that sort of stuff. Was never taught to me in a classroom, because you just don't do it like that. Yeah. So when you then bring that back down to the primary school, certainly in the older ages of primary and into the secondary schools, and you look at the skill sets, it's around having students, from an employer's perspective, you're probably not, yes, you want to know that they understand what the job they're applying for, or they've done a degree in maybe, but you'd much rather have someone who has the skills to be adaptable, to learn on the job, and to become better because of that.
Well, look at this now. Like, adaptability should be the top needed by everybody, right? What happens if the world shuts down in 2 weeks?
Yeah, and starting from that primary sector all the way up, I think we should be, and that goes back to the cooking that Charlie's been doing. It's been great for my daughter at 17. She can cook a bit here and there, but she's been wanting to cook more, probably because she's maybe a little bit bored. But also what's great for me is knowing that when she goes further on in life, that she'll have those skill sets already, and that I probably maybe didn't have quite a 17, maybe 18, 19, but yeah, listen, I think I mean, this topic can go on, and I'm surprised actually no one's maybe said anything in the chat. With that though, if anyone has any questions that they'd want answered and they want to put them in the chat, feel free. If you want to speak and you want to raise your hand, please press the raise your hand, and we will more than happily take any questions. So maybe I'll give it sort of 20 seconds, 30 seconds if anyone's got anything they want to type. And whilst we're waiting for those, Matt, I guess we can briefly talk about a webinar we're doing later at 4 o'clock with a much bigger panel. We'll be talking about special educational needs and accessibility and supporting that in remote learning, and the engagement piece. And we've got some really cool people, right? We've got some I guess what do we call Greg? We called him
Yoda,
wasn't he? Yoda of remote teaching. So we got Greg Hughes.
My worry is that you called me Jabba the Hutt, didn't you?
No, Jedi, I think, and Luke Skywalker. We got Simon Pyle, we got Aaron Webb, we've got Benji Rogers, we've got Sophie Lamb, Kristala, and the one and only Paul Hutton, who is absolutely fantastic as well. So from that perspective, it will be really, really great. We have got a question, so Simon, you'll be able to watch these again through the link that Ryan has put up, which is essentially, I'll bring up the page now. Sorry, I'll just go back there. Is academia.co.uk VTC, and there'll be a registration button, but you'll get to view those for free. So I guess in terms of resources, we've got a couple of QR codes. I'll give you. I'll leave it on this really. You're welcome to scan them. One will take them to Academia's resources page. Matt, this will take you to your bulb selection. We should review this and make your YouTube one available. But those going onto those YouTube resources, actually 30-second clips, right? Minute clip. Not very long, a bit longer. I don't know.
Some of them go for about 5 minutes, depends if really something.
So feel free to watch those, and they're free. So I guess from that perspective, Matt, as always, it's a huge pleasure to be on the Webby Radio with you. And we're hugely indebted to your participation, and look forward to speaking to you this afternoon. To everyone else, thank you very much for joining us. It's been great. This will be, I guess, hosted, as Ryan said, on the Academia VTC webpage, which is there, and I've brought it back up on the link here. And then if anyone's free this afternoon, there's still time to register. You can register right up to 4 o'clock. We've got a great webinar this afternoon, and hopefully that will be as enjoyable as today. So with that, I'm going to turn my video off and my mic off, but I will still be, and Matt hopefully will still be available to answer any questions in the chat. So thank you, and speak to you soon.